Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Easter to everyone tuning in. Happy Easter to you, Bale. Thanks for being here. I hope your Easter is going as well as can possibly be going for having just started not too long ago. Yeah, I thank everybody for being here. It is the holiest of holy shirts. Yeah, I big fat guys. We look good, and well, I don't know if we look good, but we certainly look noticeable in floral Hawaiian print shirts, and I certainly dig them. So, last week we talked about our boy Shamgar and how, they kind of buried the lead on that guy. And so today we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to start with a new segment as requested by Bale called The Rule of the Law, where we will discuss a seemingly weird and obscure law from biblical times and try to figure out exactly what the hell they're talking about. And was there any practical reason for that law? Or is it just one of those weird things? Then, our little lesser known Bible character for today is Jael, who has become a very popular name, I've noticed, especially in certain communities. And I think that's interesting. And we're going to look at her story a little bit and see, is she really a hero? Or is she just kind of a bitch? Because I think both of those are honestly fair interpretations of her. Or was she just the ultimate pragmatist? I think that's also a fair assumption. So let's move along here and let's get to the rule of the law, shall we? We're going to talk about the rule of the law. So, again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, this segment was requested by our buddy Bale, and we aim to please here. If there's other segments that you're interested in hearing, let me know. I'm always happy to tailor these streams to what you guys want to hear about, so we can totally do that. You just have to let me know what it is that you want to hear about. And so, Bale mentioned these rules, so we're going to get into some rules. So I picked a rule that I would say it's fairly obscure. I'd say most people don't know it, or if they know it, they know it only in passing as one of the crazier things in the Bible. And it's a rule that I knew about as a kid. And then when I got older, and actually started working with the Jewish community a lot, and I worked at a Jewish school, that they hipped me that they had a different take on this rule, and that it kind of helped justify keeping things kosher, which one of the key tenets of kashrut is that you don't eat milk and dairy together. So you don't put cheese on your burger. That's a no-no. You also don't just have a burger without cheese, but dip your french fries in cheese. No, it can't be in the same meal. It actually, most observant Jews won't eat one or the other on the same day, or with at least within like 4 to 6 hours of each other. So, what's up, Hux? Welcome, welcome. So that the kosher diet is odd. Now, there are some people that'll tell you it has some gastronomic benefits and that, meat and cheese can be very hard to digest. If you eat them separately, it's better for you. We're not going to get into all that. Not going to get into all that. But it is kind of odd because there's no specific mention in the Bible that says, thou shalt not eat milk and, dairy and meat together. That is never stated. But one of the weird ass rules that is this rule. This is the first of 3 times it is mentioned. Twice this rule is mentioned verbatim, like in this exact verse. Twice. Yeah, kosher is. It's really hard too. You need multiple kitchens in your home, so some people like financially cannot afford. It's why one of the weird little Pittsburgh architectural things. If you go to Squirrel Hill, a lot of houses have 2 kitchens. A smaller kitchen on the lower level that is the dairy kitchen, and then a full cooking kitchen that is on the main level of the house, which is the meat kitchen. Because technically, if you're really keeping kosher, they shouldn't even be in the same kitchen. You should have 2 sets of pots and pans, everything. So let's read this here. The best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. That's what we're focusing on here. That you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. That seems really fucking specific. Like, was there actually a delicacy where you took a kid, a young goat, and boiled it in the milk of its mother? I have not been able to find any such evidence of such a thing. But, yeah, this line is weird. And then, Exodus 34:26, just a few chapters later, same thing. Exact same verse, Do not boil a young goat in its mother's milk, which the Jewish culture has taken to mean don't eat milk and dairy together. And then one more time, we get it a third time in a different book, in Deuteronomy, which, if you know anything about the Bible, is basically just a book of laws. It is truly the book of the law. It is just rule after rule after rule that the Jewish people have to obey. And there it says, ye shall not eat of anything that dieth of itself. So if you find, a dead carcass on the side of the road, not cool, can't eat that. Thou shalt give it to the stranger that is in thy gates, that he may eat it, or thou mayest sell it unto an alien. Basically saying, this is good enough for anybody who's not my people, but if you're my people, you can't eat this shit. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe, or roast, or boil a kid in his mother's milk. So this was important enough, mind you, that now they have hammered home on this 3 times. 3 times we've gone over this. What on earth could possibly be so important about that we have hammered on it 3 times? Clearly, God means this, right? Do not boil the fucking goat in its mother's milk. He really couldn't be clear. The Bible takes numerology very seriously. Whenever things are mentioned multiple times, it's because they mean it. It is a serious thing. Yeah, God's like, hey now, stop that. Or is he? Let's think about this. It's a very specific charge. If you read the rest of the book of Deuteronomy, the laws are fairly fucking cut and dry. If a child strikes his parents, you strangle him. It's cut and dry. You remember, the 10 Commandments. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. They are what they are. So this seems kind of odd that what God means is don't eat meat and dairy together. But he says it by describing not being allowed to cook a dish that, again, historically, I've had a hard time finding anybody who cooked this dish. Could there be more to it? Yes, I think there is. Because, you see, many scholars have maintained that what this verse actually means is God is telling them to not adhere to a practice in the Old Testament that they believe the Canaanites did, where the Canaanites would take a goat, boil it in its mother's milk, and then take the ensuing broth and scatter it about the fields as part of a ritual to purify the fields to bring in a good harvest. So that would make sense. God's telling them not to do that. Except for, again, anthropologists, actual scientists, not just people who read books, like Bible scholars, have never been able to find any evidence that these people actually did this. And again, it's a really specific thing. It's really specific. Why is it so specific that you're not supposed to do this when we can't find any evidence of people actually fucking doing this? It seems strange, right? So it's gotta mean don't eat milk and dairy together, right? I would disagree with that. And let me show you why. So, okay, we're going to, and why would I say that eating milk and dairy is not a big deal? Because God himself freaking does it. What's that? And Abraham hastened to the tent unto Sarah and said, make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. That means make bread. Abraham ran into the herd and fetched a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man, and he hasted to dress it. He's roasting the veal. And he took butter and milk and the calf which he had dressed, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. And who is the they? that they are talking about here? That's right, it's JC himself. That is right. This is from one of the most important parts of the Bible if you're an Israeli. If you are an Israelite, this is as important as it gets to you. This segment is where God comes down and finds Abraham and Sarah and their group camping in the desert. God appears to him in the form of a man, and tells him, your 90 something year old wife is going to get pregnant and have a son, and he's going to be the father of a nation which will be my people. This is as important to the Jewish faith as any moment in the Old Testament. And in this super important moment, God himself is eating butter, milk, and meat. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me that God would be super anti dairy and meat together, yet at the most important story in his book, that's what he's eating. That seems crazy, right? So what else could it be? What else could it be? I've done a lot of research on this, and I've come up with what I think is a very plausible what it could be. It was an idiom. Do not boil the goat, a baby goat, in its mother's milk was the same thing as saying, didn't mean the same thing, but it was an idiom, much like when pigs fly, or, monkeys might fly out of my ass. That's not actually going to happen. You're making a point. What point, what idiom could you be making with don't boil a kid in its mother's milk? Well, when the Israelites were subjugated, which happened, every 15 chapters in the Old Testament, one of the things that you had to do as a subjugated people was take some of your first fruits, the first harvest, the best harvest, and give it to your oppressors. Well, the Israelites had, and many other oppressed people, had perfected the art of mixing in some of the old grain from last harvest to try so that the weight would be right, but they would keep more of the good grain for themselves. What God is telling them here is when you bring your offering to the temple, because as we discussed some last week, you had to bring offerings to the temple to take care of the Levites. Well, God was basically telling them, hey, don't take the old and mix it in with the new. Don't take some of that old grain from last year and mix it in with the first grains of this year and give that as an offering to God. That would be disrespectful. Don't mix the old and the new. Don't boil the kid in the milk of the mother. It's an idiom. And now, for thousands of years, people have not been deloying the most delicious thing on earth, a cheeseburger. They have been denying themselves that because some jackass thought that an idiom was a verbatim command. That, to me, is the most logical take, and that's why it's used after a mention of tithing, so to speak, each time, is that each time it is said, make sure you give your first fruits to the temple, don't boil a goat in its mother's milk. He's saying, don't cheap out on us, don't, give God the leftovers of last year and keep the goody good from this year for yourself. That's all we're talking about, people. You can eat meat and cheese together. God doesn't give a shit. I stand by that. It's an idiom. Let's stop, trying to take the Bible literally. Because when you don't take Bedouin fairy tales literally, and you also start to realize that they were people like you and me, and they probably had turn of phrase too, just like you and I do, you end up with ridiculous things like people thinking that some motherfucker was actually running around boiling baby goats in their mother's milk. That just seems way too labor intensive for the time. So it's an idiom. Eat your cheeseburgers. You're going to be all right. So that was our rule of the law this week. Thank you, Bale, for suggesting that segment. We will do them to start off our sermon each week going forward. So now, let's move on to the main event today, to today's star of the show. Have we tried boiled goat in goat's milk? We have not. Maybe that'll be a cooking stream that we'll do. That seems gruesome and terrifying, but yeah, let's get with it. So today, we're talking about Jael. Of if you know anything about art, you've seen this painting or one of the 8 million others of Jael, because this is an incredibly often painted biblical scene. Jael and Sisera, the murder of Sisera. It's very interesting. Depending on how the painting is titled, tells you everything you need to know about what the author feels about Jael and her claim to fame. But there's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to try to go fairly quickly and not get bogged down too deep in a lot of it, but there's some belief that this story never even happened, that it is just that it is just a story. And it may very well be. But it's really interesting because I feel like this story flies in the face of a lot of biblical teaching, and not even as much biblical teaching, but as in biblical understanding and how people have interpreted the Bible. Let's just say women are often shat upon by people who really love the Bible, and women are treated as less than, and that they're always supposed to be subservient, and that men don't need to listen to them. These are themes that most Bible thumpers will cling to. Yet this story flies in the face of all of that, as well as is a very important piece of propaganda, which we'll get to in just a moment. So, is she the hammer of justice or just the worst hostess ever? I'll let you decide. So we're going to set the scene for you here. 12th century BCE Canaan is under the control of King Jabin. He is listed as being the king of the Canaanites. Canaanites is kind of a blanket term. Sometimes they are just referred to as the Canaanites, as in the people who lived in the land of Canaan. And sometimes, by Maxwell Silverhammer's Inc. Love it. I'm a big fan of that song. Or sometimes the Canaanites, we actually learned what tribes. Canaanite was kind of blanket for all the people that, as we talked about last week, lived in Canaan before God helped the Israelites discover it. So, he ran shit. The head of his army was a dude named Sisera. He led 900 iron chariots, and keep in mind, this is the very end of the Bronze Age, beginning of the Iron Age, so the iron chariots they're legit. They're mowing people down with these things. His military had completely subjugated the Israelites, and yeah, there was a whole lot of raping. Now, rape was unfortunately always a tactic of suppression that militaries used, but it is interesting to note that they specifically mention Sisera as being kind of, what's up, Kurt? They specifically mention that Sisera utilizes it in a campaign of terror, almost trying to, we'll breed the Israelites out through rape, that kind of, not a popular guy. Not a popular guy. Sisera, not well liked. So, I debated where to insert this little bit of info in the story, because I didn't want to be accused of burying the lead, but I also didn't want the information that I'm about to reveal here to really... Yeah, he does, but I'm about to mix it up for you, Bale. I didn't know where to include this info about Sisera, so I'm just going to put it right here and let you decide what to do with it. We don't know a lot about Sisera other than he was a general who was incredibly successful. He's described at one point as being such a badass that the very ground, like other generals, quake before his voice. That's how badass this guy is. Well, if we are able to understand anything from the Jewish Chronicles, there may be a reason why Sisera is so badass. Sisera's dad was very likely Shamgar. That's right, motherfuckers. Shamgar threw such a beating on the Philistines that he became a minor king afterwards. And that allowed his son, Sisera, to become a big deal to King Jabin, including the leader of his entire army and kind of a stud. So, yeah, there's, while we don't know that to be 100% true, every bit of detail that we can find says that Sisera was in fact the son of Shamgar, which I thought was pretty cool. And so I didn't want to be accused of burying the lead and, not telling you guys that. So, the story of Deborah is one of the oldest stories as far as when it was written down. It was written down as close to the events that occurred as anything else in the Bible, we think, especially the Old Testament. The language that it's used, Slamgar, yeah, he threw down, apparently in more ways than one. But yeah, the language used shows that this was written a very long time ago, but yet not as close as we would believe. Because you see, the story that I'm about to tell you here is actually told twice. It's told once in the details that we're taking from, which is considered to be the most factual retelling of the story. And then it's also retold in the Song of Deborah, which is basically a battle hymn kind of poem that occurs one chapter later in the book of Judges. It changes a lot of details around and basically tries to make it seem more glorious for the Israelites than what actually happened. And that was pretty common at the time, but it's interesting that it was written several hundred years after the initial account was written, which also could have something to do with why some details changed. But, so we're setting the scene now. King Jabin and his homeboy Sisera have been oppressing the shit out of the northern 10 tribes, which I've got the map cropped here for you, so we're not worried about Judah and Benjamin down in the south. They're not involved in this story. So, Deborah is a prophet, and she's been talking to God. I love how these stories, that's just accepted as normal. Instead of, that chick heads out into the desert and claims that she talks to God, we should fucking commit her. Instead, it's, dude, that chick goes out in the desert and talks to God. We should totally listen to her and do what she says. Different times. So, Deborah goes to Barak, he's kind of a big deal. He swings the big dick between the northern tribes there, especially of Naphtali and Zebulun. She says, Barak, God has had it with this King Jabin. He's a real jagoff. Sisera has been raping the people. God's pissed. He wants you to raise up 20,000 guys, 10,000 from Naphtali and 10,000 from Zebulun. Now, these numbers were probably completely made up. There's no way they had that many people, but I digress. And she said, you got to go up to where you see my red star there in the north, Kadesh. Go up to the Kadesh Valley and kick Jabin's ass. Kick him out of here. Get him out. We're done. Barak is not feeling real confident in this. The iron chariots have been laying the smack down on his guys for many years. He doesn't see how's he going to take on, the iron chariot cavalry. Deborah says, you got to go and make sure the battle's on the specific place at the specific time, and God guarantees you will win. He's not buying it. So he says to Deborah, all right, I'll go, but only if you come with me. You come with me, I'm in. And I think that's very interesting here because this was, obviously a completely patriarchal society at this point. Women were basically nothing more than items to seal deals and produce progeny. So the fact that he's looking at her as a good luck charm that he needs to bring with him for this super important battle seems a little funny, So Deborah tells him she's willing to go, but she makes one more prophecy and says, the glory for winning this battle will go to a woman because you wouldn't bring you with me. Oh, no worries, Baal. So, because you won't go by yourself, the glory for this battle being won is going to go to me. Barak assumes that, she's talking about herself. Oh, a woman is. Deborah's not talking about Deborah. No, no, no. Barak missed that. But, so he goes. Now, remember where I mentioned that God told them to fight the battle in a very specific place? There was a reason for that. And the reason was that in the Kadesh River Valley, there is a river. That's why it's River Valley. And where they battle is alongside the river. And I don't know if you know anything about iron, but it's fucking heavy. So iron chariots are very heavy. And apparently Sisera walks into a tactical nightmare. The riverbanks are swollen, and his fucking iron chariots get stuck in the mud. So now the most effective part of his army is completely useless. So what appears to be a great strategic military decision by Deborah, hey, go fight here at this specific time, is downgraded to being, oh, God did that. Again, we're kind of underselling what the woman did here. Oh, God did that. No, Deborah obviously clearly understood military tactician shit and picked the spot where this battle was, making his iron chariots useless. So the Israelites rock and roll all over these motherfuckers. Without the iron chariots, without their kind of shock and awe tactics, our buddy Sisera is out. His guys are getting their asses kicked. He flees. And the Israelites are in hot pursuit because they remember his, legacy of rape and murder, and they're not real fucking happy with him. So he flees, and in the north, he comes across a Bedouin people known as the Kenites. They're mentioned once or twice in the Bible, not to very great effect, just they were a Bedouin tribe who were known as metal workers. And they were very good metalsmiths, which kept them friendly with just about everybody because, as we know again from last week, Israelites did not have metalworking capabilities. A lot of the other people in the area had very limited metalworking capabilities. And the fact that they let us know that the Kenites were very good. Bedouin means traveling people. They were nomadic. They were farmers or herders. They usually raised goats, camels, things of that nature. And they were just kind of a nomadic tribe. And so the Kenites are mentioned as two things. That they are very good metal workers and that they are friendly with King Jabin. They have a peace with him. So Sisera gets to them, goes to their leader and says, look, you got to help me out. Barak and company are hot on my tail and they are going to kill me. As he is at peace with Sisera's boss, the laws of hospitality, which are brought up a lot in like Game of Thrones and other ancient stuff, that shit was real. It was very real. The laws of hospitality were absolutely paramount. You had to observe them. This was a cultural touchstone. You obeyed the laws of hospitality. And since they were at peace and he came asking for help, they were inclined to take him in. So they did. So then Sisera is taken to the tent of a woman Jael. Now, the text is a little murky. The text refers to her as basically the leader of the Kenites' wife. He could have been a guy that had a lot of wives, and she was just another one. She could have been his main wife. Or it could have just mean she was a woman of the Kenites. The text is a little interesting there. It's murky. I will say, painting her as the wife of the leader makes the story a little more interesting. But again, there's no way to prove that that is actually what it is. So, but she, being his main wife, would have had a separate tent. That's a different law we'll get into on a whole different time. So he comes to this tent, and he has every reasonable expectation of hospitality and protection. He lays down. Jael provides him a big, comfortable blanket. He asks for a drink of water, and she brings him milk. And that is a very interesting and specific thing to be pointed out. that she brings him something far more valuable than what he asked for. And she also, water would have been just a very simple request of a guest, but she brings him milk, treating him more like royalty. Also, milk, it has a mothering kind of connotation to it. Then, the Bible doesn't state this, but it's stated in many of the Jewish texts that she proceeds to fuck him 7 times. So she feeds him some milk, she bangs his brains out, Sisera falls asleep. He is now sound asleep, expecting to be protected. What does Jael do? She gets a tent peg and nails it through his temple, nailing his head to the ground. He's dead. She has violated the most important rule in their society, that you treat your guests with hospitality. She's broken the most paramount rule. She's also, if we are to believe that she is the wife of the leader of the camp, she has broken that rule, the rules of marriage, by sleeping this man. And so she's a bad guy by female standards in the Bible, right? I mean, she slept with a guy who wasn't her husband. She committed premeditated fucking murder. Clearly, and the milk is part of that. The milk shows this was not a crime of opportunity. She was trying to tire him out so that he would be deep enough sleep that she could drive a tent peg through his fucking skull. So you would think that she would be reviled, right? Yet instead, she is listed in the Bible as being venerated among women, and that God would bless her for this. And I think that's where we get to the interesting bit of propaganda with this. That the first piece of propaganda is clearly that the statement here is that God's laws are more important than man's laws. And that even though the rules of hospitality stated that he should have absolutely been protected from what happened to him, because he was an enemy of Israel, it's okay. I think it's also kind of important to point out that it once again shows someone who's not an Israelite coming to the defense of the Israelites, and that if you believe in the one true God, this is a way to get in good with that God, is to protect his people. So, it's, again, turn your back on your own people, turn your back on your own customs, and do what's good for God, because you will then be blessed by God, even though you'll be shunned by society because you've broken all these societal rules. I think that's an interesting way to look at this story. It's also kind of interesting that we have Barak, who wins a great military victory, but yet gets no credit because it was Deborah who planned the true tactical shit. And you also have Jael is the one who gets to finish off the big bad Sisera, and she does it through a very womanly way. She uses her cunning and her womanly wiles to trick him and then murder him, but it's okay because she did it on God's behalf. So again, women are being shown in this story as powerful, but yet all through cunning and guile, not through any direct strength, which unfortunately is probably about as positive a light as the Bible is going to put on women in any Old Testament text. But Jael is kind of venerated as this great woman. Now, what I think happened, and since you're here, you probably are at least somewhat curious as to what I think happened, is it's a little deeper than that. The Kenites were Bedouins. They moved around. They were friendly with King Jabin, but they clearly weren't loyal to him, or they would have been listed as his subjects, not just people who were on friendly terms with him. And could it be that Jael just saw the writing on the wall? Sisera was not a popular guy. He had just lost a crushing military defeat, And the people who had more reason to hate him than anybody now apparently are the dominant political faction in the area. What better way to make friends with them than to nail the guy they really don't like's head to the ground? That is certainly a good way to make friends, especially if you keep in mind that unlike the Canaanites, who were known to subjugate people, but then basically they just wanted taxes. They didn't really eradicate or oppress people. That wasn't really their MO. I'll tell you what the Israelites were known for: absolutely annihilating people. They were all about sowing salt in the earth, killing men, women, and children, and completely erasing groups of people off the map. So maybe Jael just said, this motherfucker is not worth dying over, because if Barak shows up here, he may kill us just on principle that we're helping this dude, even though the rules of society kind of dictate that we help this guy. And technically, Barak should have had to respect those rules and kind of stay back, hang back, and say, okay, we're not going to annihilate your people for just adhering to the rules of hospitality. But as we have learned, and I think the other people back then had learned, the Israelites didn't play by those rules. The Israelites annihilated people. And so I think that Jael was more just being a pragmatist and realizing that there is the potential for this to get really fucking bad. Why don't we just kill this dickhead? And then we can be friends with the Israelites, who also, hey, don't have metalworking capabilities and would therefore be very lucrative friends to have instead of frenemies or maybe even outright enemies, because you followed the rules of hospitality. So, I can see why Jael did what she did, but she still, to me, is the worst host ever. Because, the rules of hospitality were the rules of hospitality. But I will say, I think there's a pragmatic reason behind what she did, which, again, I think this story is also very interesting to me because so many biblical trains of thought lead that women cannot ever drive the bus. Women can't run the show. Yet Deborah ran the show here, and Jael was who actually had the balls, figuratively speaking, of course, to do what needed to be done to remove Shamgar's errant son Sisera from the picture and make the world a safer place for both the Kenites and the Israelites. So that's what she did. That is the story of Jael. So I'll leave it to you to decide whether you think what she did was justified or not. I wanted you to at least understand that it's maybe not quite as nefarious as the text makes it seem. She definitely violated the laws of hospitality, but she may not really have had a choice. And in fact, you could even add in the subtext that that her husband may have put her up to it, because he could certainly, it's much easier to say, oh, that evil, wicked woman, she's the one who murdered Sisera and broke the laws of hospitality. I would have never done that. And he almost gets off blameless. So that's a whole nother aspect to consider, is that, he knew what was going to happen the whole time, and that he put her up to it because he considered her disposable. For all we know, Jael was killed right after this. We don't know. We don't know that her story ends there. We don't get the denouement for her. It is interesting, though. Another little side note that I'll leave you with. When it's known that Sisera died, and it gets back to his mother, she apparently wails 100 times in agony when she realizes that Sisera, her son, is not coming home. And that is why, at the highest holy holidays of the Israelis, they blow the shofar 100 times. is they give 100 blasts on the shofar for the 100 wails of Sisera's mother, because the Israelites' God had used someone else to destroy her son. It's a very weird, kind of creepy thing, but they're into it, so good for them. So, thank you for joining us on this Easter Sunday morning. I hope this has been enlightening for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we will be back next Sunday. I haven't decided what we're going to talk about yet, but we will be talking about another rule and another obscure ass Bible character. I've got a few in mind, and yeah, pull this up for the fam at Easter dinner. I'm sure that'll go over well. Well, at least you guys can stop talking about politics, and they can all just talk about how much they hate me. So there you go. See, you got some. I'm glad I could help. But yeah, thanks for being here this morning, everybody. I hope everybody has a lovely Easter. I'm just gonna try to soldier through and survive mine. Hell, I might start drinking in the next few minutes because I'm just not looking forward to this. This is gonna be a brutal day. This is like the steel cage match of holidays for me. So I'm gonna buckle up, try to be as positive as I can. I'm going to eat some ham and just try to roll with it. I hope everybody has a wonderful Easter. Have a good day. And remember to be hospitable today. No driving tent pegs into people's fucking heads when they fall asleep on the couch from too much Easter dinner, alright? That's not fucking cool. Don't try to say God told you to do it. Don't say I told you God told you to do it. Don't put that voodoo on me, alright? Yeah. No tent pegs into fucking Uncle Leo's head while he's asleep on the couch. No matter what dumb shit he says at dinner. Yeah, no. Do not put that on me. I did not tell you to drive tent pegs into people's heads. I told you why it wasn't hospitable. Keep that in mind. I told you why it wasn't hospitable. But in all seriousness, have a wonderful Easter, everyone. Think about how nice and sunny it is outside, and the fact that spring has sprung, and just let's do a little better today than we did yesterday. Alright, everybody, happy Easter, take care. Reverend Riff signing off until next week.